Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Allie Thomson. Allie, welcome to the show.
Welcome to you and into my little room in actually sunny England today. It's a sunny day, so that's good.
Well, you have to enjoy those when you get them.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we had a pretty good summer this year, weather-wise. But I mean, now that we're into the autumn, the fall, I think rainy days are mostly what's predicted.
That's from the family I have there. That's what I've been told.
Yes, yeah. And we've moved. I just mentioned you pre-recording. We've just moved into a new house, and we've moved even further, deeper into the countryside. So it's very, very rural where we are now, but fabulous. It's a beautiful part of the country. So it's sort of west of, I guess, about an hour and a half west of London, kind of just south of. You might have heard of Bath. Do you know Bath? Mm-hmm. So yeah. we're about 25 minutes south of Bath and further west from London. So it's a really beautiful part of the world.
And nice and quiet for recording.
It is, although there's a guy out with a lawnmower right now in one of the gardens. I'm actually, I said to you, this will be my studio, but currently it's full of rubbish. But also what I need to do, because I'm in quite a quiet, very small village, I've got to get a lot of soundproofing done before I'd even consider setting up the studio. So that's I've been decorating more than I've been setting up sound equipment. So, but that's to come. It will all eventually get set up, and I'll get back into recording probably in January, sort of in the new year. Get Christmas out of the way.
Yeah, well, see, you've got something to look forward to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that thing of taking some time away from writing or anything to do with recording, it only takes literally just a few weeks, and I'm starting to get like itchy of, I've got an idea, and where's the computer? Oh, it's not set up yet. So yeah, I definitely come January, I'll have lots of ideas to get started on for the next projects, whatever they may turn out to be.
Yeah. Tell me this, Allie, talk about setting up your studio.
Yes.
When did you set up your first personal recording studio?
Wow.
However makeshift it might have been.
That's a good question. I mean, not long after I made my albums on A&M, I did 2 albums from A&M in the early 80s. And on both of those albums, this may end up being quite a long story, but on both of those albums, I worked with a guitar player called Alan Murphy, who was the most fabulous guitar player and became a wonderful friend. And Alan and I kind of started to set up a little studio together, which was my first taste of having my own creative space, but it was very much a partnership. And in the end, I kind of moved back to the States for a while, and he joined a band called Go West. I don't know. Do you remember Go West?
Mm-hmm.
And so he went off touring. So that was the first attempt at a studio, which would have, as I say, probably that would have been mid-80s. And then once we moved out of London and I moved into a sort of farmhouse kind of situation, I started to set up a studio. And again, that was probably mid 90s. And since then I've always had a room. I had rooms in my own house. I had rooms in a big barn near where we lived. And then eventually I took a studio in London. When I started to get really quite busy as a writer producer, I felt it was important to be in a community of other people. So I had a studio for a while at a studio called Sarm, which was made famous by Trevor Horn, a very famous record producer. So I had a room there, and then I had a room at another place called Sphere. And it was just full of, it had big rooms, big recording rooms, and then it had like 2 or 3 smaller writer-producer rooms where it was all our own equipment, but the acoustic treatments and stuff had been done. And then eventually I just moved back to having a room in my house. So
Well,
And I've never, yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
No, and I've never not had a room since then. I've always had a creative space in my house. So
Well, I was going to say that, that's the thing you mentioned about, having a room at the house. That's the upside of technology
oh,
is the fact
absolutely,
that,
100%.
now you don't need to go to a huge studio and buy studio time to record stuff, at least your basic tracks, what
Yes,
have you.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean,
it creates a lot of freedom.
I miss that. If I'm honest, I mean, there is something extraordinary about you creating a framework of an idea and then going into a nice room with a lot of great musicians and throwing that idea at them, because I'm a competent musician. I'm not a brilliant musician, but when you throw an idea out that you've envisaged a certain way and they suddenly start playing something else and you go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, and obviously that there's a whole camaraderie thing when everybody's playing together, and I love that process, and I love that process even when I was producing other people's records. But unfortunately, it's an expensive thing to do, and these records, the last couple of years when I've started doing my own records again, I simply don't have the budgets to rent a big room with a great engineer and 5 great players to just sit about for 2 weeks and play music. So it's by necessity as well that I've ended up recording music this way.
Yeah. Well, tell me this to digress, as we often say on this show, every musician's journey starts somewhere.
Yes,
So for you, musical household that you grew up in?
very much so. Yeah, although it was a slightly fractured childhood, if I'm honest. Sadly, my mother died when I was quite young. I think I was about 8. I had 2 older brothers, and what that did was it sort of dispersed the family a little bit. So Dougie, my eldest brother, he went off to a school further away, and my other brother went off to college, and I stayed with my dad. And then so we would meet up at holidays, Christmas and New Year's and all that sort of stuff. But there was always music. And funnily enough, I have quite vivid memories of my brother Dougie coming back when he'd moved to London. He'd started playing. I don't think he'd joined Supertramp yet, but he'd started playing in bands. And when we got together at Christmas, he brought all these albums. Check this out and check that out. And of course, I was about 12 or something, or maybe 13, and he was sort of playing me music that I hadn't heard of. Having said that, at that age, and even in Scotland, music was a bond, a friendship bond, really. We all played a lot of music to each other. A lot of music was discovered just by hanging out with your mates, and they would play you something you hadn't heard before. And I do remember even, as a teenager, sitting around in people's houses playing, hey, I've got this album, almost like we'd meet up like a sort of cheese and wine party, except it'd be a beer and an album, and you just sit around and play music together. And so, music was really important growing up.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, mentioning Scotland,
Yes.
one of our viewers, Margaret, is originally from north of Glasgow.
Oh, yeah.
And she wanted to know if you're fluent in Glaswegian.
Well, I'm not going to demonstrate it now. No, I never lived within the city boundary of Glasgow. I grew up just on the kind of periphery of Glasgow. I was born in a place called Rutherglen, and then we moved to the borders, and so I was always in and around Glasgow, but I never ever lived in the city boundaries of Glasgow. So in truth, if I did speak pure Glaswegian, it wouldn't be that authentic, because I was never really a true Glaswegian. And of course, I left Scotland just before my 17th birthday, and within, I don't know, a few weeks of being in London, I had to change my accent because nobody understood what I was saying, So I may disappoint your friend by not giving my rendition of a Glasgow accent. Probably best.
Well, I believe she left Scotland about the same time that you did. Yeah. So I'm sure that she's lost whatever bit that she had as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I feel my accent is still a Scottish accent, but there are some people that when I lived in California for a while, there was people that had lived there 30 seconds and they already had lost the Scottish accent. You know, they already had quite a sort of, you know, mid-Atlantic kind of accent. But I've kept my accent. It's not changed really, probably since I was sort of 18, 19, it's not really changed.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. You mentioned Dougie bringing albums back,
Mm,
for you to listen to. Do you remember what albums those were? Any of them?
yes. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There's a funny little story here that I'm going to tell you because he brought back I think it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and maybe like the band or something. And my other brother Kenny, he brought back Supertramp. At which time Dougie wasn't a member of Supertramp, and it was the first Supertramp album. They made 2 albums before Dougie joined, which Dougie joined when they made Crime of the Century. And Kenny brought back for that Christmas the Supertramp album and played, and Kenny played it to everybody. And my brother Dougie was, yeah, it's all right, it's all right. And sure enough, whatever it was, probably not even a year later, he had joined Supertramp. So it was, but yeah, I do remember him playing Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which I was fairly indifferent to at the time.
Well,
I like the Supertramp record.
You and me both.
Yeah.
And actually, Crime of the Century is one of my favorite albums of theirs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a bit later, but yeah, the very first Supertramp album, I think it might be just called Supertramp.
Supertramp.
Yeah, with a face in a flower, I think is the cover, something like that. I really like. In fact, and again, I can remember really liking Roger Hodgson's voice, even then. Before obviously then I got to know them, and I could loosely say they're friends. Fabulous band, and of their time, maybe one of the best bands, I think.
They are easily, in my opinion, one of the best produced bands. The production on their albums is just incredible.
Yeah, it was. And they really took a lot of time and a lot of care. That was a question I remember being asked quite a lot when I put out my first record, and people would say, "Oh, weren't you incredibly influenced by Supertramp?" And I'd often say, well, I was, but mostly because of the meticulous way they went about making records and how the quality of everything that was recorded and mixed was just of the highest level. And I kind of got to witness that as a teenager, sitting in the corner, or going to meet them after a mixing session, and they would play me stuff, and it was quite a sort of building block for my idea of how music should be made, was the way they went about making their records. And I guess that was probably the biggest influence in terms of Supertramp per se.
Yeah. What are some of the things you remember most about those days of hanging out with the guys?
Just kind of so exciting. I mean, I think I was the first trip south, where Dougie had said to me, "Come and have." I think it was a Christmas. He said, "Come and have a few days after Christmas with me." And they were at that point. They took a farmhouse not that far from where I am now in Somerset, and they were rehearsing what became Crime of the Century. So they'd written the songs, but they took this farmhouse in the countryside. They all went down there and they rehearsed, probably for 6-8 weeks, something like that. And so I was allowed to come down then and hear the sort of the beginnings of that album. Then the following summer, again on my school holidays, I came back down and they were finishing up Crime of the Century. So, and I was allowed to stay. I was staying at Roger Hodgson's mother's house in Oxfordshire, but we would come in to the sessions. Either I'd come in by train, or Dougie would drive in and I'd tag along. and that was the mix. I think the mixing of Crime of the Century, and I'd never seen that before, so I'd never seen a mixing concert. Well, I'd seen mixing concerts, but I hadn't seen the mixing process. And of course, in those days, they didn't really have automation, so it was lots of hands. Everybody was given their little job to do, you know. But just incredible excitement. You know, I knew something was going on that was magical, both the creative process and that specific record. I felt like, oh wow, this record's really good, you know. And even at 14 or whatever age I was, I knew there was something great going on. But yeah, just that opportunity as a young lad was fabulous, just to be part of, to see that stuff going on.
How much of that experience drove you to head to London a few years later?
Massively. I mean, Dougie, Supertramp moved to the States, I guess, late 70s. They'd already started to have a bit of success, and they decided they wanted to move there permanently. And Dougie was still living in London then, and I'd done some exams, and I had a place back in Scotland at university. And Dougie said, you can come down for a few weeks and then you're going back to university. And of course, I had no intention of going back to university. And so I managed to get a job in London working at a little music company, just making the tea and running errands and that sort of stuff. And then the whole Supertramp entourage moved to California, and I was already kind of set up in London. I think I moved down in the August, and they all moved to the States probably about 4 months later. So yeah, no, I'd no intention of going back to Scotland once I got to London, and you got a job.
You had a taste of the music biz, and you were set.
Yeah. Although the music biz per se has never been my favorite subject, but certainly being around musicians, and I mean, what I really wanted to do at that stage, if I could, was to get a job in a recording studio. But I did apply for a few studios, but those opportunities were few and far between, and I needed to get a job to basically be able to pay my way in London. So when this offer came up to work at this management record company, it was great. It didn't last that long, but it was an opportunity for me to stay in London and pay my way, sort of thing. Got a little flat with a bunch of mates and just started really enjoying living in London. So it was great.
How much of what you learned, observed, what have you, from that first job, gave you insight moving forward, as far as like how the business operates?
I guess in hindsight, not a lot, really. I think the influence of as I was alluding to earlier, of being around Supertramp making records, that was the most profound experience of that period in my life. Working at this management record company I saw this was again late 70s, and the music industry could be quite excessive. There was quite a lot of parties and drugs and people, being a bit crazy. And yeah, I mean, that left me slightly ambivalent. I was really always driven by making music and wanting to be around music makers and really be in the studio. I just thought, this is the place I'd like to live, is in a studio, making music and twiddling knobs and playing with EQs and so yeah, the business side of it, the sort of machinations of the record industry has never really appealed to me very much. I know it's a necessity, but it's never really appealed to me very much.
Well, I kind of look at it as a necessary evil.
Absolutely, it is, and I can't speak for how it is nowadays, but it definitely changed from when I think Supertramp's first sort of started to have success through into the 80s, and by the time I was sort of fully professional, as it were, in the music industry. I felt the music industry had changed a lot, and it had started to become a lot more corporate, and there seemed to be more and more people with opinions, and there was a lot less freedom for the artists to be signed and then just to be told, go make music now. It was much more restricted, and as I say, full of people's opinions. And records would take forever when they didn't really need to take forever, because if they just let people get on with it. I mean, I'm talking in generalizations here. I mean, obviously there are exceptions. There are always exceptions where you sign to certain record companies and they give you that freedom for at least a couple of albums, But I got that a little bit on my first record, but then after my second record, I could feel that wasn't going to continue with A&M. They weren't just going to let me, write a bunch of songs, go into the studio and just have fun. that wasn't gonna happen,
Well, tell me this: how did you get the deal with A&M for that first album?
Well, I had sort of, when I worked for this management company in little label in London, towards the end of that, I was sort of sneaking into the studio and starting to write and sing with some of their actual artists on that label, and there was the beginnings of a band formed from that, and it didn't, nothing came of it. I mean, there was a few problems. One of the guys in the band had a bit of a drug problem. Ironically, his name was Dallas Taylor, and he played on Deja Vu with Crosby, Stills and Nash & Young, and that was the first album I ever bought. So he was kind of, without realizing, he was kind of a hero of mine because I loved that album. But Dallas had some real issues, and the other guy in the band had some alcohol problems as well. So I was only 19, and it just all went completely to bits. So Dougie said to me, why don't you, big brother saving the day again. He said to me, why don't you just come out to LA and hang out for a few months and maybe try and write some songs? And that's what I did. I went out to LA, and he had a basement in his house, and I just sat there and wrote some songs. And then fortunately, Supertramp had a little demo studio that they used to rehearse in, and I managed to sneak in there and get my songs recorded. And then once I'd recorded the songs, I came back to, and people heard the songs and thought they were good. I came back to London, and there was a music publisher called Bob Grace that heard them, and he loved them, and he said he wanted to sign me. So I signed to Rondor Music in London, and then Bob started to then play these songs to record companies. And then it was probably only nine months after that I landed a record deal. And in the meantime, Bob had sent me back to LA to write with an American artist called Gary Wright. And so I wrote with Gary, and actually from those sessions, I ended up writing maybe one of his last ever hits, which was a song called Really Want to Know You. I don't know if you know that song. So I'd already,
81.
Sorry?
1981.
Yeah. So I'd already sort of started to have a bit of success as a songwriter then I made my record, and then obviously shortly after that Take a Little Rhythm came out, and that did really well too. So so that his name was Bob Grace, and it was Rondor Music through publishing rather than gigs or that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, Take a Little Rhythm, title track. You had a lot of success with that song.
Yes, it opened a lot of doors, and it was great. I was still very young. I think it was just before my 21st birthday, so it was a bit crazy. But yeah, I loved it, and I kind of probably should have knuckled down and written a few more of those songs, but I had other ideas, I think.
Yeah, what was the story behind that song?
I wrote that song in the Dougie's basement in Topanga Canyon in California, and I just wanted to write. Like a lot of songs, they go through various phases, but the very initial version of that song I wrote in the basement of his house in Topanga, and it's really just a song about my love of music. that's really what Take a Little Rhythm is. It's you know, I mean, it can't cure cancer, sadly, but it can lift the spirit, and it can, you know, put people in a better place listening to music. So that was the lyrical inspiration. And musically, I mean, I was terribly naive as a musician, and I didn't have a huge array of chordal knowledge. So they were the kind of chords that I came up with and on guitar, and yeah, and it changed it went through a few iterations where I did that demo, and then I remember when Bob Gray said, let's get a record deal, but maybe demo that again. So I demoed it again and did a few more tracks. And then finally there was the recorded version, which again, I added a few new elements, like the soprano sax was never on any of the original demos. So yeah, but it was kind of the first fully formed song I ever wrote, in a sense, you know. So yeah, it was a little gift for me, a little gift.
Yeah. Well, tell me this, as a songwriter, what writers are your biggest influences?
Wow. There are so many. There are so many records that are, you know, sometimes for me, I'll gravitate to the whole package, not just the songwriting. But top of that list would probably be Donald Fagen, because you know, these sessions I was talking about earlier, when me and my mates aged 14 would sit around and have a beer and listen to music and share thoughts about that music. When we all first heard Steely Dan, probably Can't Buy a Thrill, maybe Pretzel Logic, I can't remember which album it was, you know, we were all just like, wow, this is different. We hadn't really heard that harmonic complexity that they brought into music. So yeah, I'd have to say Donald Fagen was a massive influence. I mean, I think the Beatles probably were. I think Crosby, Stills were probably. I think not that there was an influence musically, but again, at that age as a teenager, I did listen to a few prog rock things too, for my sins. I quite liked Yes, the early Yes records, like the Yes album, Fragile. What was the one? Close to the Edge, and then I pretty much lost interest in that genre of music. I liked a couple of Genesis albums when Peter Gabriel was still there. So yeah, those sorts of albums were a big influence. And then you go deeper into the songwriting, a lot of that West Coast sound, like Jackson Browne, fabulous. I mean, Joni Mitchell, yeah, she was a huge influence, but also just an inspirational person for me, you know, because of her lyrics and her imagery and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that you could tell that she was going from that whole folk world into the jazz world, and that transition I just thought was, you know, with Hejera, that album, just beautiful. Loved that whole era of music.
You're not the first songwriter to mention Joni Mitchell.
Yeah. Well,
she comes up on this show quite frequently.
Does she? Yeah. Well, she's an extraordinary human being. I think not just as a musician, but as a truly unique person. I've never met her, sadly. I've heard lots of stories about meeting her, but I've never actually met her myself. But yeah, amazing.
Yeah. I'll tell you, earlier you mentioned Alan Murphy.
Oh yeah.
On Take a Little Rhythm, the track Jamie.
Oh yeah.
It's a really nice guitar solo on that track from him.
Yeah, that was Al. Yeah. He just swarmed. He was a very charismatic man, Alan. Very handsome, very funny, very easygoing. And he just walked into the studio. We put the track up. He plugged in his 335 Gibson 335, and I just went, oh my goodness. How does somebody, didn't look at a chord chart, just did it all by ear. Not that the chords were that complicated, but even still, and he became such a dear friend. Sadly, he passed away. I guess, when did Al pass away? Late 90s, probably. At that time, he was playing with who's that jazz funk band? Level 42. He was playing with Level 42. But him and I were great friends, and he played on everything I did after that, and he was in my touring band. But more than anything, he was just a really special human being, just the most generous, humble, great person. A great loss, really a great loss to everybody.
Well, you mentioned funk. Your second album, Deception is an Art.
Yes.
Yeah. Had a little funky bass line there on the first single, Foolish Child.
Yes. So that was a little bit influenced, I think. Again, my time frames on this stuff is it was a few years ago. So, but I think I think I had been listening to quite a lot of Chic and that era of sort of soul dance thing with obviously with Nile Rodgers. And the bass player I had at the time was a fantastic Venezuelan guy called Durban Laverde, and he loved all that kind of stuff as well. So that bass line that's him sort of embodying that whole Chic sound. You know, that what was the bass player in Chic? It was because they were partners, weren't they? There was Nile Rodgers,
Bernard Edwards,
exactly. So he was Durban was definitely getting a bit of the Bernard Edwards vibe on that track.
Yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with you can go with that route.
Yeah, and also the sound, I think, as well. I think the studio engineer. That album, Deception is an Art, was recorded at a fabulous studio in Colorado called Caribou.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with Caribou?
Yes.
And the engineer of that album, the recording engineer, had lots of guitars, and so we were talking about it, and he said to Durban, "Hey, try this one." And it may even have been one of those types of guitars that Bernard Edwards used at the time, but it had a very specific fat kind of funk sound, and it really suited that song. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Now that album had received critical acclaim.
Yes,
but the sales didn't match Take a Little Rhythm. Was it a difference in marketing?
It was the sort of it's a convergence of a lot of things that were going on at the time, most of which probably instigated by me. But in my defense, I really wanted to try and grow musically and make something that was more of an album. I really wanted to tour. I really wanted to be not just a kind of one hit thing. And so when I made that album, I'd kind of deliberately or consciously tried to make the songs a bit more adventurous. And I think A&M didn't really see me like that, or maybe they did, but down the road a little, not then. So there was this friction perhaps between them saying, well, he's had a hit, radio like him, he's a moderately attractive young man, let's keep him in that zone. And I didn't want to do that, and so I think Deception ended up becoming a bit of a problem before it was even released, because I'd gone down this road and I'd started touring as well. I'd put a pretty big band together, rehearsed in the UK, done a little short tour in the UK, and then I was supposed to come and tour in the States. Got myself a great agent, and he'd lined up a lot of good touring. I think I was touring with the Little River Band and Doobie Brothers, all those sorts of people. And then A&M just wouldn't support it. They just said, we're not going to give you the tour support because we think it's too soon to be investing all this money in somebody that's basically just kind of had one hit. And of course, me being a petulant young man, I just threw my toys out the pram and demanded that this was no good, and they had to let me off the record label immediately. And they did. They did. They just said, all right, if you want to go.
There's the door.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we had to do, obviously there was a legal side to it that I had to, sign away a few things. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the arrogance of youth, where I thought I was much better than I was, and A&M didn't think that was a risk worth taking. I think they would have happily made a third album with me, but they would have insisted that it was a much more A&R controlled record, that there were guaranteed 3-4 radio hits on it, all that sort of stuff. Which actually they would have been right to do that. If they let me make a third album, it should have been that good. It should have been, the writing should have been better and the focus much greater. Probably an outside record producer. I'd just done a few sessions with David Foster at the time. And so somebody like a David Foster getting involved, I probably would have made a much more radio friendly, much more commercial record. But I didn't. And, in fact, I didn't make an album again for over 30 years. So
38 years.
Well, I did do bits and bobs. I did.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I was signed to a few other things, and I'd done a few featured vocals and that sort of stuff. But no, I hadn't done an album in 38 years. Thank you for reminding me of that, Michael. The passage of time.
Yeah. Any other good reminders I can be of, just let me know.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, when we were talking about Take a Little Rhythm, I remember seeing you on American Bandstand with Dick Clark.
Oh yeah.
What was that like? I mean, you were young and
Yeah.
you had the big hit out, and here you are talking to a legendary music guy on national television. What was that experience like?
Well, obviously looking back, and it's a bit of a blur now, but it's a funny thing. I mentioned that expression a second ago, the arrogance of youth. To some extent, that's what I expected to happen in a weird way. I sort of thought, well, it's on the radio. People say it's really good. Hey, I'm on the Dick Clark show. Also, you have to remember that for me, Dick Clark, I knew he was a famous music TV presenter and television personality, but he wouldn't have had the same. It wouldn't have meant as much as it would say I'd somebody that had grown up in America. Right. But I just very exciting and very, I was nervous on all those shows because I hadn't really found my feet as a performer really. So apologies if anybody's watched that and gone, he's not very good, that guy. But but I know I loved it. Why wouldn't you? It was just, I was 20 or something and I was on national TV and I'd written this little song that everybody seemed to like, and yeah, fabulous, great fun.
Especially when it's the first fully formed song that you wrote, it has all this success.
Yeah. And as I say, that arrogance thing, I'd seen my big brother become very famous, although in a different way, because obviously Supertramp were one of those groups that were slightly anonymous as personalities. They weren't, Dougie was never famous, like he didn't walk down the street and get mobbed or anything. So, but I had seen success up close. And so to some extent, like I say, if it went kind of like I wanted it to. And when that success started to come, it felt quite natural. It didn't feel like this is weird. And yeah, it was exciting. And I assumed that was just the beginning of a lifetime of being a famous singer. But as I say, that's not what happened. Yeah. And of course, my life on a personal level would have been dramatically different had that continued. I would have, I'm sure so much of my life would have been completely different.
Yeah, well, after Deception is an art, then you went back to focusing on songwriting, correct?
Yeah. I felt I did. There was some, discussions with other record labels, and there was some recordings done. I did some recordings for CBS. There was some talk that Warners were interested. I did write a few songs with David Foster, and David had shown an interest in maybe making a record with me. But in truth, I'd made a bit of, Tickler and had done well, and I'd written it on my own, so I made a reasonable amount of money from it. So I just came back to London and started to make more music. I was interested in producing. Even at that age, I was by then I was 22, 23, but I really wanted to start producing. In my backing band, there'd been a fantastic singer, a lady called Carol Kenyon, and I decided I wanted to write some songs for her, because I thought, well, you're a superstar, you should be making records. And if I can have any sort of influence in getting your music to labels and whatever, then I will. So I wrote and produced a bunch of tracks for her and got her a record deal, bizarrely, with A&M. So that gave me the taste for writing songs and producing artists and writing songs with artists. And although I did continue to keep a few things of my own going, I didn't really focus on that. I really focused on this idea of writing songs with and collaborating. I hadn't, both my albums up to that point, apart from a couple of songs, I'd written on my own, and I'd really liked that thing of collaborating where things happen quickly. You've got a bit of an idea, you throw it to the other person, they come up with something, and by the end of the day, you've maybe written 2 or 3 songs. I found that really liberating and exciting. And I just concentrated on that pretty much for the next 2 decades,
Yeah. Well, you've had a lot of success, as a songwriter, especially with artists in Europe, recording your songs.
Yeah, I had a few good years. I mean, it's like everything, it's the old, either your phone's ringing off the hook or all you can hear is the sound of tumbleweed, But I in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I had quite a few hits. I had a big hit in Canada with a French-Canadian artist called Rock Voisine, a song called Kissing Rain, which was the title track of that album. I had a hit with an Italian artist called Laura Pausini, which I ended up getting nominated for a Latin Grammy for that. I started working quite a lot with the Swedish, that whole Swedish thing that happened at the early 2000s. And I had a writing partner there called Andreas Carlson, who, funnily enough, was texting me a minute ago. And him and I wrote a lot of pop songs. I mean, that was the thing about that whole Swedish thing, was A, they were really in demand, the Swedes, and B, it was very pop. So I got lots of cuts with British pop artists, like there's a band called Steps and a bunch of boy bands, and then more hits in Europe, and then I did some projects with an Irish singer called Brian Kennedy, a South African band called Watershed. It just lots and lots of writing and collaborating, and quite a few hits along the way. Sadly, not that many in America, but that was all right. I think any songwriter who can survive, they need to take the hits where they can get them, and if your hits are in Southeast Asia or your hits are in North America or whatever it is, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me this, Ali. I've talked to some writers who will write something, and then an artist will come across the song, record it, and do it in a totally different way than what the songwriter intended. Has that happened to you?
A little. My experience with the songs that were successful for me, I'll tell a very short story, for example, about the Laura Pausini song, which was she's an Italian singer, sings in both in Italian and in Spanish, and is I honestly hadn't really heard of her before Andreas Carlson said, I've played the song for this woman. Anyway, but we wrote the song, but the song was written and recorded by Andreas and I, but produced by me. So eventually what happened with that song was she loved it, her management loved it, and then she she got a producer called KC Porter. Don't know if you know that name. He did Santana and stuff. He was really hot at the time.
Right.
And so he took the song and then immediately called me up and said, "It's great. Can you send me all your parts?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." So I sent him all the guitar part, just all the audio files. And in those days, I still ran all my drums from samplers. So he asked for all my samples as well. So he basically recreated the demo using all my samples and whatever. And then fast forward a year, he's been nominated for the Grammy for Producer of the Year. And I get nominated as a recording engineer and arranger, I think, because he'd used all my stuff, even though I was never in the studio with Laura Pausini, but he'd used all my demo stuff. And I think there was a lot of that going on. So that was my experience very much in that era of music, where I'd do a demo, I'd write a song with somebody like Andreas, I'd do the demo, and then somebody would want to cut it, and I'd send them my parts. Now, sometimes they would use my parts, sometimes they wouldn't. A lot of the pop stuff that we had success with in Europe, they didn't use my parts. They recreated them themselves. But mostly the arrangements stayed pretty similar. I'm just trying to think if there's any songs that were radically different. The funniest ones, of course, are the ones that get re-recorded in another language and they rewrite the lyric. And then this lyric comes back and you get the English translation of the Hungarian version, and it's, my hovercraft is full of eels, or, some bizarre lyrical translation. But no, most of the stuff that I had success was based on my arrangements and productions, if not fully, partially,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we'd mentioned the 38 years from Deception as an Art to Songs from the Playroom. What made you decide to head back into your studio and crank out a new album? Or was it something that was like bits and pieces evolved into Songs from the Playroom?
No, it was definitely a decision. It was a clear decision on my part, where I'd got a little tired of writing with young artists, with managers that had opinions, A&R guys that had opinions, and you end up putting quite a lot of work into these demos, and nothing would happen, or the artist would get dropped, or they'd bring out a record 6 months later. It was nothing like the brief you'd been given, And I started to get a little, honestly, sort of bored. It wasn't fun, particularly doing that. And I just said to my music publisher, who's one of my best friends, I just said to her, I don't want to do this for a while. I want to just go back into the studio and make my own music, because I had a studio and I'm pretty competent in a studio. And so I just started to write some new songs. But feeding into your question, I did start to look back at songs I'd written that could maybe be brought up to date and would fit into a whole body of work. So quite a lot of the songs, I'd say probably half of the songs on Songs from the Playroom were songs that had existed in one form or another previously. Even dating back to sort of mid-80s, there's a song called Black Comedy on there that was written in the mid-80s. Very different version, but so that's what it came from there. From, I don't want to do that for other people. I want to just have a go, have a bit of fun in the studio, trying to do my own music, find a few great musicians to play on it, and just see where it ends up. And it ended up with Songs from the Playroom. And once I'd finished it, I just uploaded it onto Facebook, I think, where, well, obviously on the streaming sites. And then I started to get a great feedback, and there was lovely guys in Japan called P Vine Records said, "Oh, fantastic! Can we put out your album?" And yeah, I mean, it didn't break the internet or make me any money, but I got a lot of lovely feedback and a lot of positivity for doing it again, after all these years. So yeah, it was fun, really good fun.
Well, I'll tell you, to me, that album is a great one to pop into the car stereo
Yeah.
when you're going for a nice fall drive.
Nice.
It's again, it kind of sets the tone.
Yeah. Well, music, it's a cliche, isn't it? But that whole soundtrack to your life thing, that's kind of what music is. And I actually, with that album, and probably even more so with my new album, I still like that old school thing of an album that comes and goes, that ebbs and flows, it has a beginning, middle, and an end. Because that teenage boy with his mates drinking beer back in Scotland, that's what we loved. We didn't listen to one track. We listened to the whole album all the way through. And that's the way as I say, it's old school. That's not how people dip in and out of music. They have their Spotify playlist, and that's cool. And I listen to a lot of music like that as well. But that's not what I wanted to do for my own music. I wanted it to be an album, for better or for worse, with a, as I say, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I, look for in albums is the music flow. How one track flows into the next.
Yes.
Yeah, to where you're telling not only stories lyrically, but the way that the music, goes almost like a classical piece.
Yeah.
Where you've got different components to create the whole. When you listen to an album, when it takes you on that journey, that's what I like.
See, maybe your question earlier about talking about being around Supertramp, maybe that was a subconscious influence as well, because their records were very much about that. I mean, I remember at the time Dougie saying, people say, Crime of the Century is a concept album. Do you remember those concept albums? And I'm not sure it was particularly, it's just that the collection of songs went together where it felt like it was telling a whole story. And again, with Breakfast in America, that was never a concept album, but the songs just flowed, and it had this sense of humor about it, and it was a body of work, and I think that's something maybe lacking a little bit from modern music. I don't know.
Well, I think now the concept of an album is lost on people under a certain age.
I think so.
To where
they
it's
don't have
about
time. They don't have time to listen to an album. They don't. It's true though. People don't have the patience to sit down of an evening and listen to my new album's 45 minutes. They don't want that, and that's cool. I mean, like I say, you got to be able to do both. You got to be able to have songs that are on there that people will go, oh, we'll have those 2 songs and put them on a playlist. That's great as well. It's just as a creator setting out to do a body of work, that's what I wanted to do. And the other thing, harking back to what we said about me creating songs from the playroom, I didn't really give, I couldn't give a shit if people liked it or not, because I liked it, and that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be authentic. I didn't want to try. I'd written tons of pop stuff that was really 3 chords, very structured, but I'm not going to pull that off, I don't have the moves for it, but so that's what I had to do for it to be authentic. I had to try and make an album from the sort of old school approach.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, on Songs from the Playroom, Avalon Street, that's one of the songs that really struck a chord with me.
Okay, great. I love that song, actually. It's funny, because I've been concentrating so much on the new album, I've forgotten some of the songs that were on Songs of Living, and that is a song I love as well, and that's actually the story behind that is, I mean, musically it's musically what it is, but that's a sort of first girlfriend story in a way. It was actually, the street's called Avalon Road, and it's in Chelsea in London. And when I was very young, there was a girl that I was quite obsessed by, and her and her sister used to live in this little house on Avalon Road. And it was that song's kind of about, I do this quite a bit in where I sort of look back at love from distance, and maybe accurately, maybe not so accurately, but you have these memories of how it was. And that's so Avalon Street was one of those songs where I was sort of looking back at we never ended up having a relationship. It was always it was me that was deluded enough to think she might like me, But yeah, I'm very fond of that song too. Thank you.
Yeah. Tell me this, Allie, when you're writing, are you someone who is a music first, a lyric first, or just it happens as it happens type writer?
I think the process is music first, but notwithstanding that, I quite often have a list of titles or little lines or things that I hear somebody say. Something just pops into your head. You go, oh, that's a cool phrase, and I'll write it down or I'll put it on my memo thing on my phone. But the actual process of putting a song together starts really with music, either on guitar or on piano. I'll just sit until I find, like most modern songwriters, you'll sit and you'll come up with like a chord sequence that inspires you melodically, and then fairly quickly I'll then throw that into the computer and I'll start moving things around, and so it begins.
Yeah. I'll tell you, ironically, earlier you mentioned Donald Fagen. I had, had some friends listen to The Last Rodeo.
Oh, yes.
And one of the comments was, this album has got songs that are perfect to put in a playlist mixed in with Steely Dan and Donald Fagen solo works.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that couldn't be a higher compliment, frankly, because he is definitely one of my musical heroes. It's funny. I did an interview a few nights ago with some lovely people, and they mentioned this thing about Paul McCartney, and they were sort of saying, "Oh, when your record came out, this is Take a Little Rhythm." They were saying, you were compared to Paul McCartney, and I was like, "Well, wow, that's pretty good." And I feel the same about Donald Fagen. Is that he's someone that I've looked up to since as a teenager. And so to be even talked about in the same sentence as him is a fabulous compliment. I did meet him once. It's one of those never meet your heroes conversations, but I was invited to a studio in New York by the studio manager when he was finishing up the Night Fly. And we were going out to lunch, and she had some stuff to do. So she said, "Can you just wait like for 20 minutes till I get ready, and then we can go out to lunch?" And I met the guys in the studio. So I met Roger Nichols and some, it wasn't Gary Katz, but it was definitely Roger Nichols, his engineer. And then we're just sitting waiting. And of course, Donald walked in, and he started making a coffee, and my then girlfriend, now wife, was going, go on, say something. And I just couldn't bring myself to. I'd heard that in interviews he could be quite spiky, and a bit dismissive. And I thought, I don't want that. I don't want him to turn around, me. I go up and I say, "Donald, I'm just such a massive fan." And he goes, "Yeah, okay." I'm completely
good for you.
Me. So I just sat there and waited until this woman said, "Right, let's go to lunch," whilst Donald made his, double espresso or whatever it was. He was. Have you ever met him?
No, I have not. Yeah. I'd really like to have a conversation with him about his body of work, but what you said is not the first time that I've heard that.
Yeah, I just meeting your heroes. Same with Joni Mitchell. I was near Joni Mitchell at A&M Studios once, and if I'd been in one of those sort of pushy kind of guys, which I'm not at all, I probably would have found an excuse to hang around and meet her in the cafe or wander into the studio by mistake. But part of me also, I've heard that she could be quite feisty, Joni. So, but there you go.
Yeah. Tell me this, Allie. Besides Donald, is there anybody that you had a chance to meet where you were just amazed that you had the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I was always in the studio in different stages. Again, these anecdotes are boring, but I'll tell you another story. After I made Deception as an Art, I wrote a couple of songs that we finished the recording of them at Air Studios. Now, Air Studios it still exists, but it was in Oxford Street in central London. And we needed about 3 days, I think, in Air. And one of the days we were recording was the day, sadly, that John Lennon died. And McCartney was in Studio 2. We were in Studio 4, and McCartney was in Studio 2. And I had kind of been, I mean, I stood in the toilet with him or something, or, at the coffee thing or something. But that day was particularly bizarre because obviously the day that Lennon died, he was in Studio 2 and I was in Studio 4, and they stayed in the studio for most of the day, obviously in shock and whatever. And then in the evening, they left the studio, and we had a piano overdub to do. And I said to John Kelly, who was my co-producer back in those days, I said, "Can we nip into the studio and use the Bosendorfer piano in Studio 2? And he said, "I'll go and ask." And of course we did. We went into the studio to record this piano, and it was bizarre because looking back on it now, I was surrounded by all this Beatles, all Paul's guitars and the Vox AC30s and all that Beatles stuff. It didn't strike me as anything at the time because I just wanted to get a piano put down. But in hindsight, what was quite an extraordinary day to be recording in Studio 2. And Linda McCartney was always, in those situations, was always very friendly. And I mean, I never really had conversations with him, but he's quite an approachable guy, McCartney. I think he seems to be, I had a studio late, I think I mentioned to you, at Sarm Studios, and he recorded a bit there as well. I mean, the trouble is, Michael, because I've been in and around the music industry for a long time, I could tell you lots of stories about meeting or almost meeting famous people, but I won't bore your listeners/viewers to that.
Well, I'm always intrigued by the perspective of people in the business, other musicians, because if you love music, there are certain people that have an impact on you that if you got a chance to say hello or what have you, if you're an outsider, it's one thing, but that same desire or what have you applies even if you're in the business, where there's just some people that strike you as, man, I'd love to be able to say something, have a conversation with so and so, what have you. So it intrigues me that when you're in the business, the people that you would want to that you had a chance to talk to, what have you. So
I mean, it's true, but like I sort of alluded to earlier, I'm not a particularly pushy person. So whether you're in the business or not, that may be your nature to just go, "Oh, look, it's George Michael. I'm gonna," because as I say, I've been in and around lots of famous musicians, and some of them have engaged in conversation. I mean, it's more that kind of, for me, it would be more like the dinner party thing where who can I invite and have dinner and then really have a serious conversation with, rather than bump into them in the studio and have a 30-second hello, how you doing?
Right.
Da, da, da. I mean, I've met handfuls of famous people in that context, but it's really and perhaps also where it's more of a level playing field where they want to talk to you as well, that there's some kind of connection why they would know who you are, and they would take your perspective on things seriously. It's I'm not that well known, I'm not particularly famous, so therefore it wouldn't be a level playing field.
Well, see, I'm always intrigued by the creative process and how people think and approach creating whatever it is that they do. So for me, that's always the intriguing part of somebody who's been successful in whatever field it might be. What drove them, to get there. Once they were there, what was their mindset? What was their approach? What have you, to create what they did that was, so good.
Yeah.
For lack of a better description.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating subject and something I'm exploring. This idea of particular songs. I mean, not so much the technical side of some songs that are made and become famous, but more what was the backstory, what was going on in that person's life, what inspired them to write that particular song. Maybe the technical stuff as well. I mean, sometimes one of the things that I love so much about Donald Fagen's work is, I mean, and it has become, he'd probably punch me in the face now if he heard me say this, but to some extent, Steely Dan did become formulaic in a sense, because that complexity and that those changes and the what's the chord, the chord that they always use and all that, that was in every Steely Dan song. You could almost say, in a way, that became the sound of Steely Dan. And I suspect he's tried at times to write songs that go away from that, but his DNA is to write those complex, songs that modulate, songs that have shuffles, I know he's a huge lover of jazz. And so yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to talk to him about that, but then probably not, because I'm not that good a musician. So, and he'd suss me out straight away, but I know what you mean, that the stories behind the songs is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, Rays of Gold on Last Rodeo.
Yeah.
Tell me about that song.
It's just a love song to my wife, that she's my, and again, you were asking about where do these ideas come from. That was a documentary I was watching about the west coast of Scotland, and the guy said, as the sun comes up here in the Hebrides, it's rays of gold. And I thought, I like that. Well, I then subsequently, the album was, at one point I was going to call it Rays of Gold, but then I realized there's quite a religious connotation with that. It's used quite a lot in Christian sermons and stuff like that. And I thought, well, I don't want to go down that road of it, people thinking it might be a religious song. It's not. It's just really a song about how my wife is my ray of gold. And musically, God, I can't remember where that came from. One of my doodles is the chorus D major 7, I think. Yeah, it's got, and again, it's got a few modulations, and actually Robbie McIntosh, to talk a little bit about Robbie, because he's played guitar on both my albums. I had done the guitars on that, and it was close to being finished. And Robbie had played a bunch of guitars on other songs. And I just said, Robbie, I'm struggling a bit with this. Can I throw it over to you and see what you come up with? And he came up with this really nice, slightly funky little part on the chorus that just takes the chorus it stops being so predictable. It sort of takes the chorus to a slightly different thing. But yeah, to be honest, Michael, the construction and building of these songs is all a little bit of a blur, because I did it, I did the whole album on my own in my room, and it's some of the structures of the songs. And the other thing I do is I'm constantly changing keys. I'm really one of these people that I write a song in one key, I get it in the system, and then I play about with the tempo and the key endlessly until it gets to a point where vocally I know it's the best key and the best tempo it can be for my melodic and vocal style. And I used something I did a lot with when I was producing artists, was I'd endlessly change keys until there was a key where the lyric and the phrasing worked absolutely its optimum in that key. So in terms of chord structures, I can't remember what half of the songs are now because they've changed keys so many times. But yeah, I like that song. The thing about this album, as opposed to to Songs in the Playroom, is I'm not going to say, but there's probably one, maybe two songs I'm not as happy with. But every other song I love, and there's some songs on it that I really love. I'm really, really proud of some of the songs on this because they seem to me to represent, certainly in my current kind of songwriting mode, what I'm about. If people say, "What's your sound?" Well, I can say, "Well, that's my sound."
Well, what would one of those songs be?
The Last Rodeo. I love that song. I actually love a song that not a lot of people are talking about, a song called Broken, which is a really simple ballad. Last Train to Evermore. That's again very much my songwriting style. That kind of soul, almost Carole King kind of chord changes, but then it modulates in the chorus. So it still feels very singer-songwriter, but in a quite a sophisticated way. I think people have described that's what I do, sophisticated pop music. That's fine. I think that's good. That's probably what it is. I do.
Yeah. Well, how about the closing track, Walk the Dog?
Walk the Dog. Well, again, slight Beatles influence there. I'd always loved. I think. Now I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here by mentioning the Beatles, but I'm not sure. Was it on Abbey Road? Anyway, the song's called Her Majesty. Do you know that song?
Yeah.
Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, don't have a lot to say. And I just liked the fact that there was this really cute, quite funny song just thrown in there. And back to what we were saying earlier about an album that flows, I just wanted to have this little song at the end of the album, didn't take itself too seriously. And also, Robbie McIntosh has a lovely finger picking style, and I wanted a song that had that acoustic piano, upright piano, finger picking, and sort of a bit of a sense of humor. Plus, I have a dog, and it's true to that song is that when I do get a bit hacked off with things, I take the dog for a walk, And of course, if you have a dog and you don't live in the Caribbean, you have to put up with some awful weather when you're walking the dog. So yeah, that's just what that song is. It's a lovely little simple sort of snapshot of me and my dog.
Well, when I'm walking Rufus later today.
Have you got a dog?
Oh yeah, Rufus.
Did Rufus hear my dog at the end of it? Truffle, that's my dog going "Arr!" at the end of it. I had to get Truffle. If you're a dog owner, you know how obsessive we are about our dogs.
Yeah.
And my children are always ribbing me about how obsessed I am. They always say, "You love the dogs so much more than us."
Well, tell me this, Ellie. There's a lot of stuff that we haven't gotten to, but I also don't want to feel like you've been held hostage here. So, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure that we do?
Not really. Just that people can buy my album at www.alithomson.com, because that's the thing. Is this this process is really a DIY. I do myself. I don't have budgets to promote and hire radio pluggers and all that kind of stuff. So it's word of mouth. It's people like your good self wanting to interview me and spread the word. And it's a good place to come from because I'm not being pushed around or influenced or given a hard time by record companies, but it's challenging.
Well, on that note, Allie, we'll bring this one to a close. I want to thank you for being here.
Taking the time out of your day. Pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, anytime. All right, everyone, we're going to bring this one to a close. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic. with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.